the Declan Rice to Arsenal saga looks like it's done. Looks like it's over. The teams have agreed the instalment plan. One guy that's been absolutely all over this story is Jacob Steinberg, the Guardian's football reporter, and he joins us now. Jacob, really appreciate you coming on. This one was the transfer saga of the summer. It is now over, although we haven't seen Declan Rice in the shirt. He's not been unveiled yet. I don't think he's even had a medical, but it is done. The Hammers, we know, will receive 33.3 million this July, next July, and July 2025. Explain how this has got through.
A lot of negotiations between the clubs. It's obviously been something that's been bubbling away for quite a long time. You know, Arsenal have been pretty much pushing this since probably last Christmas, when they identified him as their top summer target. Rice was, swayed towards Arsenal by, I think, how much they were pushing him. And I think, there was a game between Arsenal and West Ham on Boxing Day last Christmas, when Arsenal played West Ham off the park. And I think when you came away from it and heard how Rice was talking about Mikel Arteta's football, you could see there was real admiration there. And that's been something that's developed. And down the last few months, it's really felt like it was always going to be Arsenal that would win this race. And it's just been a case of, could they get to the 100 million point, which has been where West Ham have wanted to place this transfer after those first few bids that were rejected, and Manchester City coming in and probably, pushing Arsenal a little bit more to get that done. They've got over the line, and last Wednesday, they agreed. It was just really a case of the clubs getting the payment structure done, because Arsenal wanted to have it spread over a few more payments than West Ham were willing to accept. West Ham wanted it done in as little as possible because of their financial position, FFP and everything. They've eventually found a middle ground, and here we are. He'll probably have it. I'm expecting to have his medical on Friday. Transfer will go through. It was never in West Ham's interest really to keep him, because they knew they'd have a very unhappy player if they held their ground too firm. And obviously, it's a shame that he's leaving, because he's such a big player, such a loved player at West Ham. But they knew that ultimately the thing they'd have to do was get as much as possible for him, and that's what they've done.
Jacob, I follow you on Twitter. I know that you're a partisan, passionate West Ham fan. The question that I'd like to ask you is, how good is Declan Rice? Arsenal signing him effectively to close the gap between them and Manchester City. They're potentially going to lose Thomas Partey. Their midfield is going to look very different next year. Is Declan Rice that good? Is he that player to potentially create a situation where Arsenal can launch a serious and sustained bid for the Premier League title?
It's obviously a huge fee. It means he comes in with real pressure, and I think that there can't really be a settling in period. It means that for that level of money, you're really wanting him to come in straight away and make the difference between what was a good title challenge last season and to turn that into a win next season. It's obviously a huge ask when you're coming up against a team as strong as Manchester City. I think that one of the areas that I would look at with Arsenal where they fell down last season, those two games against Liverpool and West Ham in April, where they were 2-0 up away from home and ended up drawing those games, which in isolation probably weren't bad results, given they were quite difficult places to go. But when you're up against Manchester City in that race, you can't really drop anything. I think that if they have Declan Rice in those games, I don't think those wins get away from them. I think they'll probably hold on to those 2-0 leads, because he's just so effective at shutting things down. He's so powerful, so physical. He's got such good reading of the game, so aware. He's a leader, which maybe Arsenal still have lacked a little bit. They're a little bit naive, I think, at times during that run-in compared to Manchester City. Rice has developed last season, stepping into the void left by Mark Noble, leaving as club captain, and Rice stepped in and leads West Ham to the first trophy in 43 years. I think it's a massive, massive signing for Arsenal. I think it, obviously, with the caveat that Manchester City are obviously going to be so strong next season, it is potentially a game changer. It'll be very interesting as well to see what he does for Martin Odegaard, and if it's going to be the case that Havertz plays in midfield as well.
Yeah, Jake, you mentioned the price there as well. I mean, look, 100 million, 5 million in add-ons, and so look, there'll be the debate about whether or not he's worth that money. I mean, he's worth that money to West Ham, and that's what Arsenal have paid for him. And I think he's a fantastic player, captain, leader, will probably be future England captain as well. He only had a year left on his contract, I believe, and he could have extended it for another year. So in theory, a year left though. and he's cost Arsenal north of 100 million. There was a time when you felt like players with a year left on their contracts could go for cheap. It was like, he's only got a year left, let's get him for cheap. He's cost quite a lot, doesn't he? For that year left, he's cost an awful lot of money. Does that mean that getting players with a year left on their contract for cheap is over? That's done? Or is Declan Rice just a separate case?
I think he's just so important to West Ham. I mean, what maybe should be pointed out is that there was a club option for an extra year. I don't think they were ever going to exercise that and make him stay against his will. I suppose you could go to Chelsea, as Rory probably knows, and look at the deals for Kovacic and Havertz, which were maybe lower than might have been expected if they'd had the longer on their contract. Mason Mount for 60 million, when Chelsea probably would have wanted to get a bit more out of him as well. So I think in Rice's case, it's really just the fact that he was so important to West Ham. He is really worth 100 million to West Ham. Harry Kane has a year left on his contract, and I think Spurs would be willing to see if they can hold on to him for another year and potentially get him to sign on. And if they can't, then take the 25 goals he'll score and lose him on a free next summer.
Jacob, obviously a lot of the conversation around Declan Rice is focused on Arsenal. What's he going to do to Arsenal? How's he going to impact Arsenal? How's he going to impact the title race? West Ham have lost their, now iconic captain. How do you feel like you will proceed without Declan Rice? How will your season go next year? Can you fill the void? I
don't think he is. He's obviously not an easy player to replace. He's probably one of those who's irreplaceable, quite frankly. And I don't think there's probably one player that West Ham could get to fill the void, as you say. I think that they're going to need at least two midfielders to come in. Thomas Souček last season struggled for form. He's technically he's not the best, but he's still such an important hard worker in the squad. And David Moyes obviously really appreciates what he does for the team. I think it's going to be very interesting to see if Lucas Paquetá, after the becoming record signing last summer, whether he can step it up a little bit. And we saw those flashes towards the end of the season, and obviously the assist that he provided for Jarrod Bowen in the Europa Conference League final. There's going to be a lot of pressure on him to probably be the talisman next season. But what you have to say is, while they're going to be in the Europa League, and that's a huge achievement, they did battle for most of the season last year against relegation, and they've now lost their best player. So they're going to have to be very, very smart in what they do. Clubs are going to know that they're going to have a lot of money to play with, so it might not be easy to get the players they want. We've seen people like João Palhinha at Fulham, Edson Alvarez at Ajax being linked with them, James Ward-Prowse as well. So there are players out there, but they're going to have to get it absolutely spot on, because we've seen with West Ham in the past, when they've lost the big players, you could go back 20 years to Joe Cole, Frank Lampard and Rio Ferdinand and so on. They didn't replace those correctly and they ended up going down. So it's going to be very interesting to see what happens.
Indeed. Elsewhere away from West Ham, Arsenal look like they're close to signing Ajax defender Jurrien Timber, a deal we believe is just over 35 million, I think 38.5 million. The Gunners are going to pay 34.2 up front, and then the rest is payable in performance-related add-ons. What do you make of Arsenal's business so far? It sounds like they've had a really good window. I remember sort of last year everyone thought Spurs won the window, but this really is a fantastic window with Kai Havertz, obviously Declan Rice, who we've been talking about, and Jurrien Timber. It's almost like they realised they needed 3 positions filled, and they filled all 3.
Yeah, I mean, I freely admit I don't know too much about Timber, but he comes in with a lot of praise around him. So again, I think Arsenal, when they struggled last season, one of those big problems they had was obviously Saliba getting injured, and players, the depth just wasn't really there. So the fact that also they're in the Champions League this time around means they're going to have more of a workload on them. So they're going to need to add quality in quality cover across the squad, which they probably didn't quite have enough of to take on Manchester City towards the end of last season. The one I find really interesting is Kai Havertz, because I've watched him for 3 years at Chelsea. Fantastically talented, technically brilliant. He can do things that get you off your seat and score goals at times that are absolutely incredible. But he doesn't score many goals, and he wasn't consistent enough. He scored the goal in the Champions League final that wins them the game against Manchester City 2 years ago. But that's really an isolated moment. A lot of the time, he sort of left you wanting more. So was that the case? Was it the case that at Chelsea there wasn't enough consistency? There wasn't really an attacking pattern along the way under Tuchel, too much changes? And is he going to be the player at Arsenal that we thought he was going to be at Chelsea when he joined on so much fanfare in 2020? Arteta, all that talk about him bringing him back into midfield, I think that may well suit Havertz because he's wanted to play in that deep role, being forced to play as a number 9 at Chelsea to fill in because of Lukaku. Didn't really work out for him. If that signing works out, I think it could really again make a huge difference to just what they're able to do next season. I still think it's a risk though, because so far from Havertz, it's been quite inconsistent at times, and I think they really need that to come off because they spent a fair amount of money on him as well.
You certainly have. Jacob Steinberg, really appreciate you coming on, my man. Thank you very much. The Guardian, football reporter Jacob Steinberg there. Do you think, honest question here, and don't worry if you seem to peeve off Arsenal fans, do you think it's a big upgrade, Havertz and Rice for Xhaka and Partey?
No, I think it's I think overall, if you weigh the entire change up, I think they've lost quality. I don't think it's as good. Like if you think about the net of this, I think the mean average of Partey and Xhaka is better than the mean average of Rice and Havertz. Yeah,
it is part of that as well, and it's difficult to quantify this because how do you quantify leadership, right? But everyone talks about Partey and Xhaka being the leaders in the dressing room. They're the two experienced players in terms of age. You don't necessarily... You get that with Declan Rice, 100%. I don't know if you get that with Kai Havertz.
No,
so
Kai Havertz isn't a leader. No.
Yeah.
He's most certainly not a leader. I think when we evaluate Arsenal's midfield, I think if you think about the player that Thomas Partey is, if you think about the season that he had overall, I think people are incredibly unkind about how well he played across the whole season. He went to pot when it most mattered. In terms of Arsenal's capitulation, I think it was personified by Thomas Partey's performances. He really didn't turn up when it most mattered. But that doesn't make him a bad player. That doesn't mean that he didn't have a brilliant season. There was a time earlier in the season when he was directly comparable to Rice or Casemiro.
This is obviously, we know he won the Europa Conference League, but if Rice didn't win the Europa Conference League for West Ham, massive, by the way, absolutely massive, how well would you have said he did last season?
Declan Rice?
Yeah.
I think he had a very good season.
Okay.
I think he had a very good season, but you can't take trophies out of it. When you ask me to factor in Declan Rice's season and kind of try and evaluate and quantify his overall contribution to West Ham, it's impossible for me to do that and not weigh in the fact that they won their first piece of silverware since 1980.
Yeah.
Of course I can't do that.
No,
and it's unfair to do that.
I guess what I'm asking for when we're trying to compare the four that I'm talking about is, did Rice have a better season than Partey?
Yes, he did have a better season than Partey. Overall, he had a better season than Partey. But Granit Xhaka certainly had a better season than Kai Havertz.
Yeah, I think Mikel Arteta's taken a risk here, a big one. And it's an expensive risk. It's a risk that's cost them 170 million quid. You're getting rid of Granit Xhaka and Thomas Partey. You speak to a lot of Arsenal fans, and yes, the midfield, let them down at times, but you speak to them, they all tell me, and they all say, it was Saliba being out and Holding coming in was the big problem. That was the big problem, not necessarily the midfield. And he's looked like he's changing wholesale changes in the midfield. Yeah,
not all of them are his choice. And look, the way that Granit Xhaka played last year, overall, I haven't been a particularly huge fan of Granit Xhaka. Overall, I don't think he's been a particularly good player for Arsenal. But he had a brilliant season last year, and he turned into a box-to-box, goal-scoring midfielder. And Mikel Arteta deserves some credit for that. Mikel Arteta helped evolve the performances of Granit Xhaka into being a complete midfielder, a complete box-to-box midfielder. So if he can work similar magic on Kai Havertz,
then wow.
I would say that the raw materials of Havertz are better than the raw materials of Granit Xhaka.
The raw materials as a midfielder?
Yes.
As a footballer? There's a difference.
They're going to play the game in a slightly different way. They're going to play the midfield role in a slightly different way. Granit Xhaka is far more combative than Kai Havertz will be, but Kai Havertz is far more skillful than Granit Xhaka will be. But if Mikel Arteta can elevate the performances of Kai Havertz in the way that he elevated the performances of Granit Xhaka, then they've got a really good player there. The problem is, if he can't and they end up with Chelsea's version of Kai Havertz, they've got a dud.
Yeah, we'll see. All right, phone lines are open, 03717 22 33 Arsenal fans, come on, let's be honest here. Let's have the conversation. Is this the big upgrade? Is Declan Rice and Kai Havertz better than Granit Xhaka and Thomas Partey?